Fred Smith here told us that B&H Photo helped change his life. Fred, tell us your story.
I was a fitness instructor in Atlanta, and I transferred to New York March 13, 2020, right as the city went under lockdown.
Oof, that's rough timing.
All the studios shut down. But with B&H's help, I started Workout with Fred. It's an online fitness platform with cycling classes and off-the-bike classes taught by me.
Talk about lemons to lemonade.
As I started looking for equipment, everybody I spoke to was pointing me to B&H. I needed a camera, a lens, microphone, capture card, audio interface.
Whoa, Fred, we're running out of room here.
Well, here's the thing. That setup is really complicated, and that's where B&H came in. I felt like every expert I spoke to had been in my shoes before, whether I was on the chat or I called. Anytime I had a question, they had a solution. I was like, I wish I called you earlier.
We're always here for you, Fred. Say, where do you film all this?
Let me show you. My living room is essentially a recording studio. Everything in here, except for the couch and the TV, are laid out so that I can do my recording.
Amazing. What's next for you, Fred?
One of the things I wanted to do for years was start a video podcast. So I started something called Join the Convo. We discuss important topics in a safe space.
Fred, you're a real mensch. Thank you for sharing your B&H story with us. If you are thinking of starting a virtual business like Fred, check out bnh.com.
That face that is usually covered by her phone has finally made an appearance. That face wouldn't be doing that if you weren't staying at a Vrbo lake house. Your together awaits. Find it with Vrbo.
Turn our attention now to our work for today. And first of all, before we get going on concluding the Judaism, we will ask if there are any comments, questions, or considerations that need to be taken up before the group. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of an oddball question, but it hit me during sermon today, or sometime during church when you were talking about AI.
Oh, the city. Yes.
Yes, the city. How did that get written when in Hebrew they didn't do vowels?
A is an H sound, okay, with a breathing mark, and so the letter. Okay. This is the equivalent of the letter that would represent this sound. Which is really more H than A. It wouldn't be a long A anyway. It would be a very short A with an H sound. But that's the letter. Okay? They have another letter that's written like this. That's a hard H. Okay, rather than a soft H. So it's true that they don't have vowels, but some of their consonants have vowel-like qualities. All right, like this one, the yod. The yod is a Y that you can say like a day, like Sunday, Y, but also like a yit sound. Okay, again. Very short sound. Okay. So AI, okay, in the Hebrew language would be written with this letter and this letter.
Okay.
And they would know. And depending on the pointing, okay, the pointing here. Oh, I'm writing it wrong. Sorry. Let's try this again. Combining English and there. Okay. So reading this way. Okay. So AI, and you would point it probably like that. Let's see if I'm right.
It just struck me today that.
Well, I thought you were going to ask a different question.
Sorry to disappoint you.
No, that's okay. It's a good. Either one's a good question. Chapter 12. Which verse is AI in? Do you have your books in front of you?
No. Bring it over. Suzanne has hers.
Okay, so it's in must be verse 8. Whoa. I was close. No, I guess I get mine. No, I wasn't close. It must be verse 8.
Verse 8 or 9.
Yeah, verse 8. Yeah. Well, my goodness, I was way off. That's why I got a C minus in Hebrew.
And how would that be pronounced?
Yeah. Yeah, seminary, that's right. Good luck with that. Okay. So I don't have to go back to my form Okay, that's how it's written in the Hebrew text. And with this mark plus this kind of H. There are really three H's. With this kind of H, you would pronounce it capital A or long A. And then with this mark, which is usually kind of an E sound combined with the Y sound, it comes out I.
I just
So AI.
didn't know how an all vowel word would be
Yeah.
written.
And there happens to be a Bob in front of it, which just simply means and. So the Hebrew means with so-and-so on one side and AI on the other. So the and is always connected to the next word. I know just enough Hebrew to get me in trouble.
But you sure get us out of it.
Now, what I thought you were going to ask is how could they talk about Ai and Bethel when Ai and Bethel don't show up as named cities in the Bible until after the Exodus?
In the writing.
Because they stopped.
Well, yeah, and when Jacob, in the story, of course, you know, Jacob is running away to Laban, and on the way he stops, and it says he stops at Bethel, and that's where he sees the ladder to heaven. Well, Bethel isn't there. There's nothing there. There's no city there. There's no nothing there. So why does Moses call it Bethel? Well, he wants to tell the people of his day, who are 600, 700 years later, when they're reading it, he wants them to be able to know, oh, I know where that is. So it's no sense giving them the name that it had during the occupation of the Canaanites, because the Canaanites were gone and the name was gone. It's the same thing with Ai. No sense giving them that name, a different name, 700 years, that existed 700 years ago. Might as well give them the name that they run into when Joshua goes to conquer the promised land.
Like with the United States, instead of referring to New York as New Amsterdam.
Right. Well, yeah. If you're, for example, yeah, that's a good example. They're saying, well, you know, if somebody would say, the Dutch got New York from the Indians for $24 worth of beef. Well, no, they got Manhattan, but Manhattan's an Indian name, but New York wasn't there yet. So, yeah, that's true. Or to say, Coronado crossed through Arizona on his search for the 7 cities of gold. Well, Arizona didn't exist when Coronado was here. But it's okay to say that because what you're trying to communicate to people, our people of today, is really saying Coronado crossed the territory that is now Arizona. And you don't want to add all that verbiage, just so you just say Arizona. So, yeah, that's very common in the Old Testament. And critics, of course, jump all over it and say, see, this was written way after it was supposed to be written and stuff like that. But, anyway, that's the answer to that. Anything else? Yes, sir.
I was wondering how many people are aware of what's going on with Equality Act.
I bet you everybody in this room, my guess would be pretty much everybody in this room. Everybody knows about the Equality Act? No. Well, that's true. Bruce keeps himself. Anymore. All right. The Equality Act. Okay. This has been spooking around for a number of years. Way back in the early part of Obama's term. I think even Clinton's term came up a couple of times. And what Congress wants to do, what some people in Congress want to do, Democrats mostly, is to add LGBTQXRYZ, whatever, alphabet, right, to the Equal Rights Act of the 60s. Okay. In other words, they want to make gender questions or gender people with different views of gender to be included along with races and cultures and other things. Okay. So, and of course, the danger here, of course, is that this is a very nebulous kind of wobbly definition. Okay. in most cases, African Americans are seen as African Americans. There are some that have so many white or Caucasian ancestors that they can pass for Caucasian. But the majority are easily identifiable. Same with Asians, they're easily identifiable. Same with most Hispanics, they're easily identifiable. Although Arabs and Polynesians and such are a lot of times lumped together with Hispanics, because to us they look pretty much alike. But the point is that if you are a particular race, a particular culture, that is fairly easy to discern, and that doesn't really change. You're not, unless you go through massive plastic surgery, a Japanese is not going to start looking like a Caucasian without a lot of work and a lot of trouble. Same with African Americans, or the other way around. To go from Caucasian to African American or Caucasian to Japanese or something is not an easy process. So again, in 90% of the cases, the discrimination problem comes from the way people look, or the way they act, perhaps, or the foods they eat, or the odors they give off, which is very common with different races and things. And so that's why those laws were passed in the 60s. The laws were passed in the 60s so that you could not say to somebody, let's say an African American person, no, you can't stay in my hotel, or no, you can't rent my car, or whatever. That's the reason that they were passed, to stop that kind of thing, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's fine. The problem here, the twofold problem. And first of all, the problem is that people are born one way, they're born male or they're born female, but they claim later in their life that that's wrong, it was a mistake. And they really are female when they have all the male genitalia and all that, and vice versa. Okay, well, so that's pretty nebulous, and it's sometimes hard to tell by looking at people, unless we all walk around without clothes on. And even then, it's probably difficult in some cases. So that makes it a lot more difficult. Okay? Also, you have people who are in those last categories, or questioning, or what they call non-binary. All right, that is, they kind of go back and forth. They feel male one day, they feel female the next day, and so on and so forth. Or even bisexual, which is they really don't care. They themselves are whomever, and they will like to mate or whatever with everything under the sun. Okay, so there's all these different categories that are very subjective, extremely subjective. And the person themselves can change after a few years. You know, it's happened numerous times. Some people have become transvestite or transgender, or transsexual, or whatever, and then 10 years later they want to go back or whatever. And so it's a very nebulous thing. So it's very difficult to pin down. And if you're going to attach penalties to this stuff, and you're going to attach various retributions of whatever kind, and lawsuits and things like that, boy, it's just, you're opening up a real can of worms. I mean, it's just a real Pandora's box. The second thing is this part, okay? Equality is fine, and we should all embrace equality, that's fine, and because that's the way God looks at us, that's true. We're all saved in the same way, we're all sinners in God's eyes, and we're all saved. But God, of course, did make them male and female. But anyway, equality is fine in and of itself, but what happens a lot of times is equality becomes the tyranny of the majority. And in other words, we not only want to be equal, we want these people to be seen as equal. We demand and we insist that everybody see it as we do, on pain of some kind of punishment. And so the majority may indeed see it that way. Now, if you believe the polls, a little bit over 50% of the American population seems, depending on how you word the questions, seems to go with the idea, well, we should treat transgender people and such, we should treat them equally with everybody else. And that's what seems to be. So let's assume that's true. Let's just assume that's true. And it's not just 51 or 52%. Let's assume it's 60 or 65%. Right? So it's a healthy majority that we assume wants to see equality across the board. Okay? Again, how does that affect us? How does that hurt us? Well, okay, what happens is, and it was in the San Diego paper this morning, they had a woman who is head of the LGBTQ committee or whatever, and they asked her about this law that was passed by the House and sent on to the Senate. And one of the questions they ask is, well, do the opponents have a point when they bring up the religious exemption? There's no religious exemption written into the bill. Okay? Her answer was, all major religions agree with this. Okay? Which is true, okay, in the United States. All those religions in the United States that have a healthy percentage of the population, okay, the major Protestants, right, and even the Romans, right, after what some of the things that the Pope has said, and the Methodists, Presbyterians, et cetera, down the road, okay, the vast majority of them do. So, but of course, she doesn't know about the little teeny Orthodox Lutherans around. She would have no clue of that we even exist. And so I'm sure she wasn't trying to hide anything. She was just saying, well, as far as I know, the National Council of Churches, the World Council of Churches all says this is fine. And that's all the churches, right? That's the way a lot of people think. They just, well, that includes everybody. So what's the problem? Why would the church want an exemption? Okay? So, and that's true on Capitol Hill as well. I'm sure if McConnell or some other Republican gets up and says, well, this is going to hurt churches because some churches don't agree with this, the Democrats are going to say, like who? Like who are you talking about? You're talking about them crazy snake handlers? Or whatever. So what happens is the majority kind of comes down hard and says, well, everybody has to agree with us. And so there is no more, there's tyranny over anybody who disagrees. And this is a problem. This then becomes a problem. But as I have been telling you for 20 years, we should not be surprised at all. And we should not be surprised when it passes the Senate. It probably won't pass the Senate this time. The Republicans are mad on a bunch of things, and so they'll probably filibuster or they'll probably put a kibosh on it. So it probably won't get through. It'll go back, they'll take some things out, they'll put some things in, it'll come back again next year, might pass. Even if it passes, it's not going to be accepted by the Supreme Court at this point. We have 5 conservatives on the Supreme Court, 4 very reliable, 1 wishy-washy. But all we're going to need is for Biden to appoint Supreme Court justice, especially if it happens to be a replacement for anybody who's even moderately conservative. And we could have the Supreme Court approved. Once that happens, and it's approved, and it's passed, and all that kind of stuff, and it's put into effect, then of course it has to be enforced. And how's that going to be enforced? Are they going to go looking for churches like ours, which have a written policy on marriage and that kind of thing? I doubt it seriously, at least at first. So we're already down 3 or 4 years, 5 years, 6 years down the pipe. Okay, then what happens? Okay, well, People want to get married here. Two guys show up at my office and say, we like the look of your church. It's real pretty, and we'd like to rent it out and have our wedding. And I turned them down, and I said, sorry, we can't do that. Look at our constitutional bylaw says we can't have that. Oh, is that right? Well, we'll just sue you. And so, of course, that works its way through the courts, and so we're talking more years, and that kind of thing. Eventually, 8 to 10 years down the road, they might start looking for people who are going to cause them problems. And they might ask, hey, can we see your policy on transgender or whatever? And we can always say no. Well, why would we do that? We're supposed to be a witness. We're supposed to shine our light, right? This whole, yeah, here it is, right here. And, oh, you teach that, do you? Yeah, okay. How about we remove your tax exemption from your property? Well, go right ahead. Go right ahead. We'll talk it out. And so another 2 or 3 years goes down the road, and so on and so forth. So the time when you or me first probably, are going to wind up in jail over something like this is probably pretty far down the pipe. We don't have a government like Canada's. Canada, because of its parliamentary system, gets things done faster. Our system, of course, they can go very fast if they want to. And everybody kind of agrees, but by and large, things take a long time. I'm not all that concerned about it, and even, it is the way of the world, and it is the way that the country is going right now, and people don't seem to have any problem with it. They don't seem to care one another, and so, I don't know. I don't think, go right ahead. Call your congressman. Go right ahead. Good luck with it. Okay? The lady we've got in this district, besides being a public drunk, simply takes her orders from Pelosi and is not listening. Who is that here? It's her. Kirkpatrick. Oh,
I work right above her office. She's never been there for the last 4 months.
Well, she has only been in town once or twice in the last 3 or 4 years. She's probably worthless, but anyway, I should say she's a recovering alcoholic. I should give her the benefit of the doubt. Yes, you have a question?
Yes, isn't there a clause that I've been reading, sexual orientation, isn't that protected? Isn't that a protection somewhere?
So in many states, 37, I think, last time I read, 37 states have that.
So why do we need to do
Well,
that?
because it's always better to have a blanket federal government cover over.
So why don't they just add the word sexual orientation?
I don't know, because every bill has to also include a bunch of other junk and giveaways and freebies.
And money to bail out the.
So, yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Well, I think in Matthew 19, where Christ says, was this person born this way or was they made that way? And we right on that, I think it's just very
You're talking about eunuchs, yeah.
Yeah, were they born this way or so?
And Jesus said some are born that way.
Yeah.
What is he talking about? When Jesus talks about eunuchs, what's he talking about? Well, he's just talking about the same thing Paul's talking about when Paul says, I don't care if I'm married. Doesn't, I can look at a pretty girl and doesn't do a thing for me. Okay? There are those God has created without any sexual desire. For the other sex or for their own, for that matter. They're not wired that way, right? And so, is it possible that these people are created with a desire to be the other gender? Sure. Just like I was created to crave tacos and enchiladas. It's in my blood. No, I'm sorry, that was in my blood. My own end, and I was probably going to say, I know this. My parents went over to the Juarez on New Year's of 1954, and I was born in September. You do the math. So, yeah. So they enjoyed a nice time in Juarez.
Are you saying they like tacos and enchiladas?
Like crazy. I mean, that's the first food my old man ate.
How does that equate to your birth?
Well, like I said, they went to Juarez, and I was born 9 months later.
Oh, I thought you were, okay.
Yeah.
I don't watch the news anymore.
So you know, is it possible? Sure. You know, I don't argue with people who say, well, I was born male, but I was put in a female body. That's a mistake. I argue with them it's a mistake. It's not a mistake. I did that on purpose. Just because it is, you know, the fact that a kid is born without arms may be due to thalidomide, but without God's permission, that child would not have been born at all. Arms or no arms, thalidomide or no thalidomide, and babies are born blind, and babies are born with cleft palates, and babies are born off. Even, I mean, I had a member in one of my congregations where the child had to be operated on before birth because they had a tumor. So, I mean, God allows all kinds of things in this world for one reason, again, and one reason only, and that is for the benefit of believers everywhere. How exactly those things line up and how they lead A to B to C, don't ask me. But that we know from Scripture. And so the people who are born this way obviously are being tested by God, and their situation is there and exists for the purpose of testing somebody else, or strengthening somebody else, or leading to somebody's conversion, or whatever. And so if that's the way you are, and you know, you feel somehow that you are trapped in the wrong body, that's understandable. I would sympathize with you, and I will say, okay, that's definitely possible. It's not a mistake, number one, because God is impossible to make mistakes, and number two, you have to learn to deal with it. It is your cross. Okay, so. I will help you the best I can, and if you slip and fall, okay, I will give you God's forgiveness, and we'll work through this. Okay? So that's the other reason I don't really have a huge problem with this. Okay, 40 years ago, the American population, what we were told by experts, the researchers in sexuality, we were told the American population was between 2 and 4% gay. Okay, 40 years ago, more than that, 50 years ago. The latest I just saw as part of the conversation around this bill was 5.6. That's not a lot of increase over 50 years. That really isn't. Now, could it get to 10%? Sure. Another 50 years, another 100 years maybe, who knows? Is everyone going to get over that? Oh, right, I'm not. But the fact that most of the American people want to see this as okay doesn't mean most of the American people are going to join that particular group. It doesn't mean that. So I'm not overly concerned about it. This is going to play out over a long period of time. I will most likely be dead. You will all most likely be dead when this really hits the fan and somebody pounds on the door of the church and says, you either got to accept this or else. And close you down. That's way down the road. But again, I'm going to call, what's her face, Bill Patrick, go right ahead. Good luck with that. It's not the way to do it. Anything else? Oh, good luck with that.
I know, but I just.
Kelly and Sienna, they take, I know, but I'm just saying, okay, they take their orders, you know, from what's his name? Schumer, yeah, from Chuckyville. So, yeah, forget it. You're wasting your nickel.
If it does pass, it's God's will.
Well, and then who's it a test for? This is just for us.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. That's a good point.
Because we are the believers.
That's right.
And so this is a challenge on our believer, you know, if it goes through,
Yeah.
what do? Well, we do nothing because it was his will.
Well, we give an answer to those that question.
Correct.
And we go, you're right, we let our light shine and we give a witness.
Yeah.
And if that light shining and witness ends up in a coliseum being fed to bears, as once happened, so it goes. That's life in a.
Remember, if you're ever stuck in that coliseum, you just have to run faster than the other guy. Not the bear.
Bears run 40 miles an hour. I don't run 40 miles an hour.
We have to be prepared to accept these things when they happen.
Well, to deal with them. Yeah. Anything else before we get back to Judaism? Judaism. We need to, I believe, discuss two sections and then look briefly, not too briefly, at the philosophy. But Lubavitch, I want to talk about Lubavitch. Okay, page 47. Is it 47? Yeah. Lubavitch. Lubavitch is real big in the East Coast and has spread out here. It's pretty big in Texas. It's getting bigger in California, and I haven't seen a lot of it in Arizona, but it might be in Phoenix area. I don't know. Lubavitch Hasidism began in 1773 in Lithuania under the leadership of Rabbi Shur Zalman Liadi, a child prodigy and student of Rabbi Dov Bayer, an outstanding Hasidic scholar. Upon Dov Bayer's death in 1772, Rabbi Zalman was sent to Lithuania to head the community. He spent the rest of his life in Lithuania and Russia, teaching and writing. His works include the Lekutik Amanan, better known as the Tanya, the essential text of the Chabad, as his teachings became known. So most of these congregations are called Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad meaning the body of doctrine or teaching from these rabbis. Better take two. You never know if they're right. Exactly. Lubavitch's work in North America began in the mid-20s when Rabbi Shearson formed the Agudas Hasidah Chabad of the United States of America and Canada. He visited the United States in 1929, during which time he met with President Herbert Hoover. He had settled in Warsaw after World War I, when his life was threatened by the Nazis. The Rebbe was finally persuaded to migrate to the United States. The arrival of Shearson in New York in 1940 signaled the rebirth of Hasidism in the New World. So Shearson is the important character for us, that is the United States. Shearson is referred to as the Rebbe, T-H-E capitalized, rather than just as in Hasidism in general, their local leaders are called Rebbe. But he is the Rebbe, and Shearson is his name. Chabad is a combination of the initials Chachma, Bina, and Da'ah, wisdom, intelligence, and knowledge. The three nodes of the Kabbalistic tree of life. I toyed with the idea of getting in a little more to the Kabbalah and the Kabbalah, and man, we go down that rabbit hole, we may never get out. So I decided to skip it. If you want to study the Kabbalah and the Kabbalah type of Judaism, be my guest. Just, go to search engine on the internet and bring it up and just follow the links and stuff, and you will go down the rabbit hole. It is quite extensive. And it's very popular now among the Hollywood types. Why? Why? Because it's mysterious.
Oh, okay.
It's very mysterious, and it's hard to learn all of the ins and outs and whatever. And once you do, you have this feeling of superiority. I know something you don't know. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and then like the Hollywood general, anyways, they know very little, but think they know everything.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so they would just gravitate to this.
Yeah, it would be perfect for them. Yeah. Exactly. Faith and belief in God share an insistence on intellectual study and understanding of religious truth.
The emphasis on truth has made education basic to the Lubavitch program. The love of one's fellow Jew, Ahavas Yisrael, is an emphasis of Lubavitch on the openness to the entire Jewish community. In contrast to most other Hasidim, who generally isolate themselves from their lax, non-practicing brethren. Want to proselytize. They actually want to get converts. They want to get people converted, and they don't really care if their conversion of people gets them new members right away. What usually happens is they try to draw people back into practicing their Judaism. Get people to start going to a synagogue, get people to start observing the Sabbath, get people to start praying in Hebrew, learning in Hebrew, get people to start observing all the festivals, not just the major festivals like Passover and Rosh Hashanah, but all the other ones like Purim coming up later, or is it today or tomorrow? Yesterday. Anyway, all of those festivals and stuff, get them going in that, and then what very often happens is people, if they do become more active in their Judaism, they eventually gravitate to the Lubavitch, and they wind up in the Chabad Lubavitch congregation. Because they find that their Reformed congregation or their middle of the road congregation, if you will, or even their Orthodox congregation really doesn't emphasize a lot of those things, and so they feel unfulfilled, and so they try to find a Hasidic group. Well, they're not really welcomed by Hasidic groups because they're unclean. They have not practiced their Judaism for maybe a long time. They're full of bacon or whatever. And so the Hasidim congregation will kind of say, and it probably isolate them for a while and see how messed up they are. But they can show up at the Chabad Lubavitch place and be welcomed with open arms. And as a matter of fact, they'll full time. Hallelujah. The prodigal son is returned. And so they're growing. They're growing because they have a lot of babies, then they're growing because they're actually doing evangelism. They're the only Jewish group that's growing because of evangelism. Hasidim, the Orthodox, are also growing because, again, they're having large families. But Reform Judaism is dying out, and the other versions. Black Judaism is kind of a weird happening that's not around too much anymore. Black Jews trace their roots to the Torah. They believe themselves to be the true descendants of the original Jews and heirs of the Promised Land, as are all black people. After the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, any Israelites remaining are believed to have moved southward and settled in Africa. Hundreds of years later, descendants of these Israelites were sold into slavery by members and by indigenous population, finally shipped to America, still conscious, some of them anyway, of their Israelite identity. As early as 1880, some black people began to recover their identity as Israelites, aided in part by the rediscovery of the Falashas, which were people in Central Africa believed to be descendant of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. Now, there's no proof that King Solomon had children, the Queen of Sheba had children like King Solomon. No, none at all. All we know is that the Queen of Sheba did go and visit with King Solomon. They may or may not have been married. We can't tell that from Scripture, and they may or may not have had children. We can't tell. But legend and the commentaries from that time when they lived said that they had children, and that she went back to Africa with the children. Right? We can't prove that. That's what they believe. And it is believed that the Balashas group in Africa are descended from Solomon and Sheba. The Balashas had practiced Judaism 600 years before Christ. Black Jews first began gathering together in the 1960s, primarily among black people in Chicago and other urban areas. Then Amin and Moret and Sadat led a group in migrating to Liberia in 1967 and then to Israel in 1971. We all, I think, remember Liberia. That was the African country that was colonized by the United States. The only colony in the United States on the continent of Africa. Its whole purpose was to receive all of the free slaves. And this was even before the war between the states. But then after the war between the states, again, the deal was that you could get free passage and not, land down in the bottom of the ship. But you could get free passage to Liberia and to back to Africa. If you were African slave, you could get free passage back to Africa and live there. And a lot of slaves did that. So Liberia is an interesting country today. It has a lot of problems, like most African countries, but it is made up of its descendants or its ancestors who were former U.S. slaves. Then many of them went to Israel in '71. Most of these later returned to the United States. And they found that living in Liberia or living in Israel was not very good, not very happy for them. They were in Liberia. They were persecuted because they were a distinct minority, and in Israel they were persecuted. It turns out that the Jews in Israel are not too happy about African Jews or Jews from Africa who claim to be Jews. They don't like them. They just don't like them. They are very bigoted toward them. They do not accept that they are descendants from Solomon or anybody else in the Jewish tree, so to speak. There is very little receptiveness on the part of Jews in Israel for black Jews. So most of them came back to the United States. Other groups not part of the migration remained as independent congregations in various cities. Black Jews follow the faith of their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with a firm belief in Jehovah, the one God of Israel. They believe that black people are the descendants of the patriarchs of what is commonly called the Old Testament. They observe the Sabbath and Jewish holidays. The holy book of black Judaism is the Torah, which contains the laws revealed to Moses. Now, when I wrote this a few years back, they still existed in places like Baltimore, Chicago, Philadelphia, and so on and so forth. However, they are shrinking fast, not only because they, unlike Hasidic and Orthodox Jews, are not having a whole lot of children, also because most of the men have been lost in one way or another, either died or killed off or gone with gangs, fell from the faith. And then finally, they find that among the black population, Judaism is unpopular, Israel is unpopular, and because of Louis Farrakhan and the black Muslims. And so the black Muslims are making much more headway into the black community than black Jews, black Israelites. And I can foresee that the black Israelites will be extinct in a very short time. Now, we have a glossary. And I'm not going to go through this, but just point out a couple of things that you might be interested to follow up on. And the first is bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah. What used to be just one thing, the bar mitzvah, son of the covenant, is now two things, the daughter of the covenant. And that is interesting to note that has worked its way through the various forms of Judaism all the way down to the Orthodox. Not the Hasidim so far, not the Lubavitchers so far, but in many Orthodox congregations, they now have bat mitzvahs. You see the spelling of Hanukkah there. I went with the C spelling instead of the H spelling because the C spelling is considered by many Jews to be more pure. So I use that. Let's see. What's another good thing? Page 50. Masorah, transmission. The Masoretic text is the traditionally correct text of the Hebrew Bible. That is what Protestants and Catholics both, Roman both, use when they study Hebrew. This is the Masoretic text. These are the guys who put the little dots and crosses and lines and stuff on the Hebrew letters so that we Gentiles could read them correctly. And they did that, though. They did that 600 years after Christ.
And they did that at a time when the Hebrew language was hardly spoken at all. So the possibility does exist that these guys didn't know what they were doing. And we're pronouncing all the Hebrew wrong. But if we're pronouncing it wrong, so are the people in Israel, because they use the same text. So it's one of those things that we're not sure about. We're not sure that the Masoretes were correct. But we got nothing else to compare it to. Because the Jews stopped speaking Hebrew soon after the destruction of the temple in Israel. But the point is that they did a lot of work, and like I say, the text is trusted by pretty much everybody. Everybody says that, we think these guys did a good job, and so, but again, you got nothing to compare it to, so. The list of one. Mezuzah, these are the things you see on the doorposts, okay? Parchment strip containing the passage Deuteronomy 6:4-9 and 11:13-21, fastened to the doorposts of the home. This is what they'll touch on the way in and out of the home and so on and so forth. Let's see what else. Mishnah on page 51, I believe. Mishnah teaching a digest of rabbinic interpretations of the Torah, compiled around 200 years after Christ. The Mishnah is very authoritative. In other words, if it's in the Mishnah, most of the Jews will accept it as a true teaching. Pesach, down at the bottom, down towards the bottom there, Pesach means the Paschal Lamb sacrifice, usually means the springtime Passover festival, and also to mark the Exodus from Egypt. And so you'll see this on food now in the grocery stores, Pesach or kosher la Pesach, either spelled out with English letters or written in Hebrew the other way. And kosher simply means that it's okay or it's acceptable. So acceptable for the Passover. It's been tradition in the Christian church, especially in the Lutheran church, especially conservative Lutheran churches, it's been tradition to use communion wine that is kosher la Pesach. Because that way we feel that, well, if it's okay for the Passover, then it's pretty close to what Jesus was using that night. As if the version of wine makes any difference, it really doesn't. But it's one of those things that somebody decided way down the pike years and years ago, and that's why we started doing it. And when you're only having communion 4 times a year, it really didn't matter much. Lutherans were not big on the Lord's Supper, unfortunately, in America. And that still is the case in most cases. It's still in the process of maybe coming back, although I kind of doubt it. Purim, top of 52, that is the lots cast by Haman in the book of Esther, determined the date that it destroyed the Jews. And of course, you know what happened. Haman got hung and all that. And so it's a festival now. And Jesus, we know, observed Purim, just like he observed Hanukkah. Sabbath is Sabbath. I guess you could know that. Shavuot, weeks, the festival of weeks, celebrated 7 weeks and a day after Pesach. Christians use the Pentecost for this festival. Rabbinic tradition observes Shavuot as a time of giving of the Torah at Sinai. Now, we don't know that that's when that happened, but it has been celebrated that way for thousands of years. So maybe they knew something that we didn't. The Shema, towards the down there towards the bottom, the Hear, the first word of the Jewish declaration of faith, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Is commonly said and repeated many times in the synagogue services. Let's see, Talmud. Okay, Talmud on page 53. Study, teaching, an extensive running commentary on the Mishnah. So it's not a commentary on the Torah. The Mishnah is the commentary on the Torah. The Talmud is a commentary on the Mishnah. So it's a commentary on a commentary. The Mishnah is a closed set, okay, a closed book. It's a finished product. Whereas the Talmud is added to, and will be added to until Judgment Day. The Palestinian Talmud, about 400 years after Christ, reflects discussions among scholars who remained there. The Babylonian Talmud of the scholar there. The Talmud is sometimes known as the Gemara, a term also used to refer to either one of these commentaries themselves, as distinguished from the Mishnah, the compilation amongst the commentaries are made. The last I checked, the Talmud ran through 19 volumes.
Light reading.
Huh?
Short, light reading.
No. They're pretty good sized books, too, last I saw them. Okay, the Tefillin, we talked a little bit about that. The little boxes people wear sometimes. Torah, we talked about that. And the Western Wall, last thing. Ha-Kotel, or the wall, the remaining part of the retaining wall built late in the first century around the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Please note this, it is not part of the temple itself, but relating to the ground, the entire enclosure upon which the temple was constructed. So it's a retaining wall. In other words, it's a wall that's built so that the ground does not collapse. So they built this wall, okay, to make a hill. And then way far away from this wall, the temple was actually built. So it's not a wall of the temple. But even Jews in Israel are believing many times that they think it is a wall of the temple, or a foundation of the temple. It was not. It was neither a foundation of the temple nor a wall of the temple. It was a foundation for the little hill that they built the temple on. And so where the temple is, of course, is the two mosques, the very important mosques of Islam, right? The Mosque of Omar and the Dome of the Rock. The Mosque of Omar sits at one end, and the Dome of the Rock sits at the other. The Dome of the Rock, we believe, sits in the exact same place of the Holy of Holies in the days of Solomon and Herod. And the rock that you can't see, but if you were Muslim, you could go and look at it. You would stand at a platform and you look down, and down about 30 feet, maybe 35 feet, you will see a rock. Now, that rock is supposed to be the rock upon which Ishmael or Isaac, depending on which your faith is, was sacrificed, and the rock upon which the Holy of Holies then was built. I don't know whether that's true. I kind of doubt it, but that's what is believed. And it's from that rock that Muhammad ascended into heaven to receive portions of the Quran. So that's why it's so holy to Islam. And it shouldn't really be that holy to Israel because, like I said, it has nothing to do really with the temple itself. It's just the retaining wall of the mount where the temple was on. But they made a big deal of it. They made such a big deal about it that if you see pictures of it before 1947, if you see pictures of the wall, okay. If you look at a picture of the western, what's called the Western Wall in pre-47, okay, the wall, okay, it's like this, and the ground above starts about there, and houses are right up next to. There was about a 6-foot little walkway between the houses of Jerusalem and the wall. During the Second World War, well, for centuries, I mean, way back. Okay, many of these buildings went back to 1600s or earlier. After 1947, this stayed because this part of Jerusalem was under the Jordanian jurisdiction. But after 67, post 67, okay,
after the 67 war, in which the Israeli army took over all of Jerusalem, all of West Bank, one early morning, without any kind of announcement of any kind, they showed up with bulldozers. And they told the people who were living in these houses, take whatever you can grab and get out now. And then they bulldozed about anywhere between 15 and 20,000 domiciles. They were small apartments. We would call them today maybe condos and townhouses, but a huge area. And they turned that area into a big plaza that goes now, it's bigger than a couple football fields. And the people who lived here were, in many cases, Palestinians, in almost all cases, Palestinians, and most of them were Palestinian Christians. And there were two churches. And these churches that were bulldozed were very old. They were historic places. But because they didn't announce their plans to anybody, they didn't run it by the UN or anybody else. These were, by the way, the bulldozers were bulldozers that belonged to the Israeli Defense Force. They were not construction bulldozers, they were military bulldozers. They were protected by tanks and machine guns. So whenever you see a picture today of the Western Wall and this big plaza, just remember that before 1967, these were homes for people. And many of them were Christians and churches existed. There were also some mosques there to the up. And many of the people were also Muslim, that's true. But an awful lot of them were Christian. And they were, many of them replaced or displaced to Gaza. They wound up living in Gaza, which is a pretty much hellhole. So, and you see pictures of this plaza all the time now. But I don't think anybody has any clue that people used to actually live there. So, but those are the kinds of things that, when you take over a country or take over some land, you can do with it pretty much what you want. So that's what happens. When you lose a war, you gotta take the consequences. All right. Anything else on Judaism?
What is there to this tax on a few years back? There was really lots being set up in the Idaho area. Tax on everything that's got that mark of the Jews on it.
Nothing. That's garbage. Nonsense.
That really went around a lot. Oh yeah.
And they're talking about the UPC seal. The UPC code. Yeah. It doesn't mean anything. Doesn't mean anything. Here, you guys start the. You're going to have to staple your own here because I didn't get around to it. These do not get collated very well. The stapler will be coming your way.
So what number is the last page?
This?
Yeah.
I have one. Hold on a minute.
So speaking to the phone, yeah.
There you go. Hold on. 70, I think, or 71, maybe. Some of the numbers did not come out. I don't know why. That happens every once in a while, maybe. Put this on this one line. I don't know what to do. I just finished it yesterday. You got to get on it. That's a lot of time to go. Let's take a roll. Let's do it.
not be able to pay.
Well, I think there's a part of it that again might be like,
You got one?
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes or so. I'd like to at least get started on this because it goes into a very long session after that. What I'm going to try to do, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. What I'm going to try to do now, now it gets hairy, okay? Because before we're dealing with worldwide religions, and we're just kind of touching the surface. And I know with Hinduism and Buddhism, you must have felt, this is the surface? Yes, it was. Okay. There's a lot more to it. And frankly, the same with Islam and Judaism. There really is a lot more. And please accept my apologies. I'm giving you just the surface, just a very little bit. Okay? Now, I don't want to do that with Christianity because as little as we're probably going to run into a Buddhist or a Hindu or anybody like that, we're more likely in our families, in our friends, in our co-workers, and our neighbors, we're much more likely to deal with people who are Roman Christians, Presbyterians, Methodists, other versions of Lutherans, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and so on and so forth. So I want to get into a little bit more, and it won't be as much just commentary as it will be facts. This is what they teach, this is what they believe, and so on and so forth. So it will be a little bit different than what we've been doing so far. So far, I've just been reading stuff, just as much information as I think I can get to you in a brief short period of time. So you'll see that development. So the development, what we're talking about is how churches got to be what they are. That's what we're talking about. How did the Presbyterians get so messed up? How did the United Church of Christ get so messed up? How did the Lutherans get so split up over various areas, and why do they teach what they do? So on and so forth. How did this happen? How did the Roman Church get as messed up as it is? And so on and so forth. So development, and then historical summary. Historical meaning, these are facts. These things happen. These people existed, they did these things, they said these things, they led people in this direction, this is all facts, but it's a summary. And in many cases, again, I invite you, I encourage you to research more on your own, because again, I will be here all day and all night for months at a time if we were going to go into this every single solitary point. Okay? So first I've got kind of an introduction. Okay? And I once again went back and paginated the paragraphs. So the paragraphs are numbered for easy reference for no question. First century Christians worshiped together in local churches. There was never complete and perfect unity among and between these churches, even from the very first decades after Pentecost. Please understand that this is not known or understood by most Christians today. Most Christians, especially critics of fellowship policy, critics of the division of denominations, will say, it's your guys' fault, you Lutherans like you, it's your fault that the church is so split up. Boy, wouldn't it be great to go back to the good old days, back into the first century or second century, when everybody was all on the same page, and it was one big happy church. It was never that way. Never. And I can show you some documents, or point you to some documents where you can find that out. Doctrinal heresy and organizational disputes continue to develop, and Christianity remains divided into the entire first century, second century, third century, and really It's always been divided. It was divided from the get-go. It was divided by the time Peter and Paul were writing their letters. Even before they died, it was divided. Otherwise, what's the purpose of the letters? I mean, was Paul do? Because Peter was agreeing with the Judaizers. The Judaizers were a faction inside the church. Paul talked also, and Peter too, about the Gnostics. They were another faction inside the church. And these guys died in the mid-60s, 30 years after Pentecost. So, I mean, really. Number two, throughout the post-apostolic church, that is the next division, which is from 100 to 300, there is no centralized authority. The five major seats of the faith and the churches around them thought of themselves as equal, independent, and autonomous. These centers were located in Alexandria, Antioch, that's in Syria, Carthage, that's in North Africa, Constantinople, and Rome. Note that four of these are in what is traditionally called the East. Okay? Alexandria, Antioch, Carthage, and Constantinople were all in the east part of the church, or considered part of the East, even though Carthage is north. They were considered to be the eastern part of the church. Note also that the most obvious important city, Jerusalem, is quite conspicuous by its absence. That was because of the constant disruption of repeated Jewish revolts. The last Jewish revolt in Palestine around Jerusalem was in 220 years after Jesus. So for the first 2 centuries, the Jerusalem church couldn't really be the leader of the church, a leader in the church, because there was war all the time. Next comes the Christianized Roman Empire under Constantine. And as you know, I'm moving along very fast, so we'll slow down a little bit. The Emperor Constantine assumes ecclesiastical power as head of the church. He's the first to do that. But this follows a very ancient Roman custom. Okay? The emperor was very often called the Pontifex Maximus. Not every Pontifex Maximus was an emperor, and not every emperor was a Pontifex Maximus, but many of the important ones were. And so it was not unusual for the emperor to claim to have authority over a religion. And when Constantine became Christian, he naturally took control of the Christian church. The East-West schism happened then. The two iron legs of Rome, Western Roman Church and the Eastern Byzantine Church, began to fragment already in the 5th century. Although an official split did not occur until the Great Schism of 1054. So then you have the Roman Catholic Church on one side, the Orthodox churches on the other side. The Roman Catholic Church was led by the Pope of Rome, spread throughout Western Europe. The Orthodox churches originally led by the Church of Constantinople, spread throughout Eastern Europe. Then the Reformation happened. 15th and 16th centuries, 2 major events paved the way for this movement. One was the printing press in 1440 by Johann Gutenberg, and the other was Martin Luther's translation of the Bible into common German in 1522. When people read their own Bibles for the very first time, they concluded that the Catholic Church had deceived them for centuries. Public protests were launched, and consequently the men and women responsible became known as protesters or protestants. The Roman Catholic Church loses England in the 16th century. Roman Catholicism became the official religion of Western Europe and England, but could not control either region with certainty because of the vast distances involved. During the years 1536 to 39, under the leadership of Henry VIII, England finally broke away from Rome. Henry was disappointed by the abuses and excesses of the Roman Church and wanted an official Church of England. He also hoped that this would enable him to divorce after the war was on, and that which the Pope did not allow. And why did the Pope not allow it? Because she was Catholic. Well, more than ever, it was. More than that. She was the sister of, close. Catherine of Aragon was the sister, the older sister of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. And without the Holy Roman Emperor, Rome could not protect herself from Islam and the Muslims.
nation. So we had to keep Charlie on his good side. And Charlie stuck up for his big sister. So then you had, after you had Rome and Constantinople, now you have Rome and England. And the Archbishop of Canterbury then becomes the head of the English church after the king. Then the Protestant churches diversify in the 15th and 17th century. The Protestant churches did not all agree with each other. Although they now had a Bible in their own language, mainly German and English, they had different ideas about how it was translated and what actually was saying. Men such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, both of whom possessed great academic leadership skills, began to form their own Protestant group. In time, others did the same, and so we have the Calvinists, the Unitarians, the Armenians, the Lutherans, and the Anabaptists, and we have to stop there. So that gives you an idea of where we're going with this, and we will continue with the Counter-Reformation next time.
So these pages are good. There's more to come on.
Oh, there is
Good.
hundreds and hundreds of pages now. And hundreds. All right, let's close it. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be abide with us all. Thank you.